Hello, my name is Michelle Abelos, and I will be discussing if systemic racism affects Black lives today. So, does systemic racism affect Black lives today? Yes, systemic racism is an issue that is relevant and affects Black lives today. However, there are counter-arguments that systemic racism does not exist or is not relevant today. But this is an issue that must be addressed and acknowledged, as some people are not aware or educated on this topic and think we are equal. What is systemic racism? Systemic racism is also known as institutional racism. According to Derek Johnson, the president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, he describes it to be systems and structures that have procedures or processes that disadvantage African Americans. This means that there are aspects in these systems that sustain and contribute to racial inequality. Some of these systems include housing, employment, criminal justice, education, healthcare, and politics. These systems are the foundation of our lives and determine our quality of life. Today, I will only be going more in depth about the housing, employment, and criminal justice systems, and how they create barriers for Black people. What most people don't know is the history that these systems are founded upon. For instance, in 1933, the Homeowners Loan Corporation was established by the U.S. Congress, and they constructed maps that ranked the risks of investing in certain neighborhoods. This was to assist Americans struggling to pay mortgages due to the Great Depression. These maps ranked areas from A, which were considered to be the safest to invest in, and were colored in green, to D, which were known for having the highest risk, and were colored in red. The areas colored in green were occupied by predominantly those who were white, whereas areas that were colored in red were residents from racial ethnic groups, were immigrants, were on relief, and or have older houses. This is called redlining, as it made life harder for occupants in those red areas because they were denied loans from banks. Till this day, it has made the housing system to be tremendously disproportionate and has affected the rates of homelessness and lack of house security, the rates of gaining and maintaining wealth, and had affected the tax support for services, especially for people of color. Black people face many barriers when it comes to employment. These barriers include higher unemployment and job instability rates, fewer opportunities and benefits, and lower paid wages than those who are white. In a 2014 report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they found that 13.1% of Blacks are unemployed in the United States, a percentage that was double than those who are white. If you look at the charts on the right-hand side, you can see that the Black unemployment rates are still higher than white workers. This is based on various categories such as gender, education, and age. The top chart also showcases how the Black unemployment rates have always been higher than white workers from the years 1973 to 2019. One reason for this is hiring discrimination in the workplace. There are studies that have shown that hiring discrimination is still evident and has not changed since 1990. There are also reports that show that white applicants receive on average 36% more callbacks than not only Black applicants, but 24% more callbacks than Latino applicants with identical resumes. This is due to implicit biases employers have. These issues are also relevant in Canada, where there are studies that have shown that the workplace is one of the most common places Black Canadians have faced racism. In a survey that was conducted, they found that 54% of Black Canadians have ongoing experience with discrimination at work. There are also studies that have shown that people of color earn 81 cents to every dollar white Canadians earn. So, how can we help with this issue? For one, we should remove the implicit biases that we have. And secondly, give more wealth toward the Black families. This is because they lack the tax support for services such as a good education, which makes it easier to find a stable job. This could also bring more opportunities for them, as Black workers are less likely to work in management and professional occupations than white or Asian workers today. What most people also don't know is that the criminal justice system was founded based on slavery and controlling minorities, which means that these historic elements are embedded into the system. This means that organized groups back then, such as slave patrol and night watches, were developed into modern-day police departments now. There are an immense amount of cases where innocent Black lives have been punished, arrested, harmed, or killed by the police. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery are only a few examples of this. From 2015 to 2019, the death rate for Blacks was 30.3% compared to 7.3% for whites. However, you should keep in mind that 60% of the population are white and 13% of the population are Black, which means that the death rate for Blacks are tremendously higher than for white. There was also a report made in 2017 that found that Black men got 19.1% longer sentences for the same federal crimes as white men between the years 2012 and 2016. A possible solution is defunding and reforming police systems. It is known that the police systems are overfunded, and these funds could be used to invest in other social services such as housing, education, jobs, and healthcare. People have also been recommending reforming the police system so that we can eliminate implicit biases and the racist historic features that shaped policing. On this slide, I have linked a video that basically summarizes what systemic racism is and the points I've covered, and also goes more in depth on the impact it has on Black families.
Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds, with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, Black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university. the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
As you saw, the video did a great job explaining systemic racism and has suggested ways we can eliminate systemic racism in society, whether it is eliminating implicit bias or finding new ways we can promote equality. Now, I want you to think to yourself, what are some ways you can help put an end to this discrimination? Thank you for listening.